I would see so many really smart people do really, really dumb things.
Alison is a PhD, prominent organizational psychologist, award-winning professor, speaker, and author, and it's called Likable Badass.
The thing that drew me to psychology is I have spent my entire life being curious about what's going on inside other people's heads. And power is controlling resources that people value. When you have the respect, people want to make you happy. They want to be in your good graces.
What happens to people like this who actually have a fair amount of power over your fate, but don't feel respected?
Power combined with insecurity is a horrible, ugly combination that leads people to lash out. The root cause is insecurity.
Women have a tightrope. It's harder to do that balance for women than men. Is that right?
Women start out with less status than men. And so what happens is confirmation bias is a very powerful thing. Say the best time to build your status is when you're new in a relationship and you don't need anything from somebody. This person has not spent more than 10 seconds even knowing you exist. And you sort of figure out really quickly, how can I show up in this person's conscious awareness and convince them in minutes or seconds that I care about them and I know something about something. So the science on it is what's called compensatory impression management.
If you're not sure whether to be a doormat or a bitch, be a bitch. And I think my wife told me that more than 100 times.
We're always trying to figure out two things about human beings. And if you could think about like in a cave person sense, if someone walks into your cave with a club, the most important thing you need to figure out about them is are they or are they.
Welcome to another episode of TruthWorks. I have lots of exciting news today. First of all, Patty is not with us because she's got some stuff going on, but I have a guest co-host. And he's like embarrassed right now. Bob Sutton is here. He has been on the podcast before. I know you guys have many fans. Welcome, Bob. You want to introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Bob Sutton. I'm supposed to be a serious organizational psychologist, but I'm mostly known for a book called The No Asshole Rule, which is my blessing and curse. That's enough.
It is. I feel like it's more of a blessing, Bob, than a curse. And it's such a good book. It's so good. And then we have a friend of ours on the show today. We have Alison. And Alison, I'm going to pronounce your last name, and I hope I don't. It's Fragale?
Fragale.
I don't want to call you, I didn't want to say Fraggle because it reminded me like Fraggle Rock.
100%.
Did you get that?
Wembley. Oh, totally. That was my generation for sure.
Okay. But I didn't know whether it was going to be like, she doesn't want to be called a Fraggle. So it's Fragale.
Fragale.
Okay. Got it. So welcome to the show. I'm going to do a brief introduction of you, but I want you to tell the audience a little bit about yourself too. But Alison is a PhD, prominent organizational psychologist, award-winning professor, speaker, and author, best known for blending science-backed insights into leadership and workplace dynamics. We're going to dig into that. And you wrote a great book, and it's called Likable Badass.
That's right. So all good. Yeah. I'm just trying.
Look, Bob's got the book.
I'm trying to follow in Bob's footsteps from a distance. Bob, and fun fact about Bob was he was on my dissertation committee many moons ago as a great favor to me and to my advisor. So that's a good summary of me. Other fun stuff. I actually currently reside in Chicago. I went, tomorrow is my 10-year anniversary of pulling into Chicago. I always joke that I went remote before remote was cool. So this is the office I'm sitting in is my actual office. So when the pandemic hit, I was the only person with 2 screens, a Zoom account, a printer, and a mic. Everyone else has a milk crate and a laptop in their kitchen. So I've lived
You're
here.
You're a futurist.
100%. And I have evolved over the 20 plus years I've been a professor to doing more and more work, serving women, not exclusively, but taking behavioral science, which is my shared field with Bob, and using it to help women advance and live happy lives. And I have 3 kids. They are all named after professional Chicago athletes. And when I did that, I had no expectation that we would ever live in Chicago, and now I feel like we look like crazy people where we live in Chicago with 3 kids named after Chicago athletes. And we used to, until she passed away, had a dog named Wrigley for Wrigley Field, so it was a bit much.
Well,
okay.
Right. I get it. Yeah, because outside of Chicago, it's cool.
So Alison, what are the name of your kids? I can't resist.
Okay, and they all have Pittsburgh Steelers middle names. That's my hometown. So they're all last names. So I have a Jordan Bradshaw, Michael Jordan, Terry Bradshaw. I have a Peyton Harris for Walter Payton, Franco Harris. And I have a Maddox Green for Greg Maddox and Mean Joe Green.
But those are actually really cool names.
I truly.
And I'm sure a lot of people, well, maybe not in Chicago, probably in Chicago they might get it more, but outside they probably would never know.
Even inside, although I confess that we look like crazy people, not one person in all the years of 10 years I've had all three of them, not one person has ever put it together. I think Maddox is a little bit obscure.
Yeah. But I love Maddox Green. What a great name.
That's my girl. So those are ambiguous. The first two are boys. You can't tell.
I love it. Yeah. Well, okay. If I was ever to have another child, I have a 5-year-old, but I don't think I'm going to. And for those of you listening, this is a great way to name kids.
It works.
It's very hard to name kids. Just do it after athletes.
It is.
Okay. So, Alison, I want to go back to, I don't know, maybe dissertation with Bob. I don't know. How did you get into all of this? Like
that's a great question.
When did this become a passion?
So it depends on what it is. So here, the rough story is I start my academic life doing research in the area of status, which is how much we are respected and regarded by other people. So that was part of my dissertation that Bob was involved in all those years ago.
Was there some reason you chose status? Like what, because it's interesting. Like I don't think a lot of people go there.
So a couple of things. It was truly, I stumbled onto it. So what my story was, I was a management consultant. I worked for McKinsey. Had no expectation I was going to go to academia, except I went to McKinsey and I hated it. I was like, this is horrible. And if I keep working here, I'm just going to get another job like this. And I was all set to go to business school. I was like, I can't do this. So I had what I called a quarter life crisis. I really like human behavior psychology. I don't understand how to make a career out of that. Let me go figure that out. I had to go to an actual bookstore, the Barnes and Noble. This was in Chicago. Got a book, Careers in Psychology, and came home and read the thing. And that was how I first learned that organizational psychology was a thing. I had no real idea. And I said, that seems like kind of cool, like psychology combined with business. I think I could do that. So I started applying to places, but I'm not from a background like a typical candidate that had a lot of undergraduate research experience. I'm coming from consulting. So I'm like, how am I going to fool all of these schools to think that I am a potentially valid academic? And I didn't even know what topics were in the field. And it wasn't easy to do as much research as you could now, where you could figure that out. So one thing I knew was that negotiation was definitely part of this space. And I was doing a lot of negotiation on behalf of my clients at McKinsey. So I said I could write about that, and that would be safe, because then I would look like I knew what I was talking about. So I wrote this really strong essay that all I wanted to do was study negotiation, which, although I found interesting, was not accurate because I just didn't know enough to know what I wanted to study. As a result of that, I got interest from people who had a lot of expertise in negotiation. This is how I come to Stanford. This is how I come to work with Bob's colleague and my dear advisor, Maggie Neal, who is a giant in this field of negotiation.
Yes, the most likable. She's so high on likable and badass. It's like off the scale. It's like whatever. I was looking at your book and like she doesn't. It's amazing. She's also like 6'1" and wears 5 and 6 inch heels or whatever. Whatever are the largest heels. It's like she's awesome.
She's got them on.
Everyone's playing for second place. But I even talk about her in the book. A lot of the things that I know and I've blended with science, I got to see her enact from a really young age. I was like 23 when I started grad school. So I come there to do negotiation. However, as I get to the program, so I get to Stanford to work with Maggie on negotiation, which I'm interested in, but I have what I can only describe as the anti-Midas touch. Every single project we try to touch that has negotiation, it just fails miserably. And I'm getting tired of this failure, so I'm also exploring what else is there. And I make contact with another professor, Laura Teetens, who had come to Stanford really studying status. And I said, okay, what's this all about? And so I started working with her on a project. And not only was it successful, which I liked, but I also found the topic really interesting. So it was like a career path kind of opportunity that I hadn't stumbled past her in the hallway and talked to her about what she was doing, I don't know how it would have evolved or what we would have found out. But that was my entry into getting interested in the topic, was someone else presented it to me. I continued to do work with Maggie. And then I continued to mainly shift from negotiation, the thing I said I wanted to do, to status, which really intrigued me. Now, yeah.
I didn't know the story about Lara Teens, who is, I'm actually seeing Lara tomorrow. She's running an organization, the Center for Advanced Study in Behavioral Sciences, for a year. So anyhow, she is also a badass. I didn't know that. She a great researcher.
And the more specific story of how it came out was that when I got to Stanford, and this is all related to the things I advise people, when I get to Stanford, Maggie, my advisor, is finishing up a intensive period as a senior associate dean, an administrative position. And she basically says, although I will advise you, I'm pretty busy right now. So I actually want you to put yourself to work by walking up and down the hallway, knocking on people's doors, volunteering in service on their projects. And no matter what they ask you to do, you say yes. You don't ask for anything in exchange. You say yes, and you do the thing. And I'll basically be back with you in a year. So that's the full story of how I met her. Was I knocked on Lara's door. Maggie told me to knock on the door. And that she said, I got some stuff for you. And that's how we started to work together. So it was Maggie's guidance.
Opportunity does knock.
Literally. And the doors at Stanford, I mean, they're no longer in this building, but the doors of this building at the time were like 10-foot tall, solid wood. Like, don't knock on me. The people in here are doing important things. This whole door is meant to keep you out. So here I would like knock on the door. And that's how I started that work. But I also think back to that advice of, it changed the course of my academic research, but more importantly, Maggie, when Bob says she's the original likable badass, she always has this mentality of how do you be forward thinking about navigating your own career and being valued and respected in the audiences that matter while being of service. And I think that is what she's done really well. And the combination of her advising on that from a life perspective, and then me studying this whole concept of status, what happens, what causes one human being to respect another human being, enabled me to bring that together and then start offering, some advice. And when I got to, so then I'm now a professor, and you're always in a role of being an advisor, whether it's your students or younger faculty or anyone. And I would see so many really smart people do really, really dumb things when it came to navigating their relationships. And I would be like, did you not have a Maggie in your life? Because there is no way I would have been able to get away with it.
What's an example? Give us an example.
An example. Okay, so here's one. This was a former doctoral student of mine who I really liked, okay? But I asked him if he would help me out with a course and do some grading for me, which he had done in the past. And he writes me back and basically says, no, this year I'm too busy. Okay. Now, and of course I'm like, too busy doing what? But never mind. Too busy. The next day, I kid you not, the next day he writes to me and says, hey, I'm working on this project with some other people. I would really like for you to read the draft and give us some feedback. And I thought,
nope.
That's really a short-sighted set of exchanges, right? I'm not going to punish you per se. I think I still helped him, but what I wanted to say was,
you're nice.
You need to invest in your relationships, and it's not that you have to do everything for everybody, but you got to decide: do you want to be in a reciprocal relationship with me, or do you not? So that's just like one that stands out, and I just thought, not smart. I mean, if I had tried that, Maggie would have.
And then the next day, come on.
Right, I'm like, this had to be on your mind. You had to be thinking. And what I would have taught somebody, as somebody who teaches negotiation, is like bundle the requests. Hey, I'd be happy to help you out. And while we're on the subject, I was actually meaning to write you because I could really use your help. Then it's a lot harder for me to say, no, I won't help you, but I still want you to do the grading. I'm kind of in now, right? So bundle rather than, no, I can't help you. Can you now do a massive favor for me? And I just felt like I saw smart people do dumb things like that all the time and think, where was the Maggie? Where was the person who was counseling you? And I think I had a good knack for thinking. I think the thing that drew me to psychology is I have spent my entire life being curious about what's going on inside other people's heads, like many people who are in this field. And I would just naturally think like, okay, what are you thinking? And then how do I show up in a way that's going to get you to think the thing I want you to think. And I just found that people, even despite being in this space, were sometimes bad at it.
Yeah. So, okay. So you start going down this status, like studying and research and what do you find about it?
So, I mean, several things. One is that there's a status judgments that we make are not random. So that's, I think, a thing that oftentimes people feel like I have no influence over what other people think about me, or no control. And it's like, technically it's right. You have no control, but people's judgments about other people are not completely idiosyncratic. They're really organized around these two dimensions, which I now are on the cover of that book called Likable and Badass, that we're always trying to figure out two things about human beings. And if you think about it like in a cave person sense. Someone walks into your cave with a club, the most important thing you need to figure out about them is, are they friend or are they foe? Are they there to kill you, or are they there to help you hunt? And that, we see that. So we see, like, the first thing we can figure out about people is their intentions and their warmth. We can judge that, even misjudge it, but we look for it in fractions of a second to try to figure out what are your intentions. And I think that's one thing that often surprises people, because at work, we're so heavily focused on proving our competence, which is the second dimension, that you don't realize that the most important thing is your intention. Because if you go back to the cave person story, if the person is there to kill you, it doesn't really matter how competent they are. In fact, you don't really want them to be very competent. It's only once they're there to be helpful that then their capabilities now come into play. Because now that your intentions are good, are you good at hunting? And if you are, then I'll take you with me. And so both of those matter a great deal, but we index a lot on the competence dimension, and we undervalue this dimension of warmth. So my dissertation, for example, was about that, which was, when are the situations where being warm and other oriented are actually better for your status than being really capable and competent? And I think that's one thing that we think about. And then I think the other is, that I find really interesting, is I spent a lot of time looking at what I call low status power holders, because there's another variable that for like when I was getting started, for the longest time was always used in the same sentence in the same breath, as if they were redundant, but you were just using it to make your sentence sound more complete. Power and status, power and status. And power is controlling resources that people value. So I have a new 16-year-old. When I hold the car keys, that's a resource that he values. I all of a sudden have more influence in that moment if I have something that you want. And so power and status are both really important sources of influence. They're fundamental human needs. So they're things that all human beings seek, and life is better with them than without them. But they're different. And so that was another thing that I started looking at as well, because I found it odd that we were constantly talking about these two things in the same sentence. Why do we need two words if they're the same thing? And if they're different things, what happens if we split them apart? So I started looking at what happens when people have power, more power than status, or vice versa. And the gist of that, which I think relates to eventually evolving to do a lot of work serving women, is that being really respected and not controlling anything is not a problem, and it actually doesn't really hold you back, because as long as you're really respected, you're still influential anyway. Even if you're not holding the car keys, when you have the respect, people want to make you happy. They want to be in your good graces. They kind of do what you say. But the other situation, when you have a lot of control and people don't respect you, that's where you start to get a lot of friction, to use a Bob Sutton word, because
bad friction,
right? Bad friction. And I mean, there's so many ties back to Bob Sutton. Bill collectors are an example of high power but low status. TSA agents would be another career example of high power but low status.
Yeah, we need to do like a whole episode on Bob's bill collecting career.
If I could remember. So Alison, can we talk about, because I've always been fascinated about what happens to people, and maybe because I've been in academia so long, we have a lot of people like this who actually have a fair amount of power over your fate, but don't feel respected. Because that's a really interesting sort of quadrant. Because in your book is about partly how to get out of that quadrant, but like, what do you do about those people? Because they can make, like, those are the people who treat us like they become petty tyrants. It's bad, right? So what do you do about that?
Okay, so here's, you're not going to like my advice, but it's got good support behind it. So there's a research on this exactly. It's actually by another Stanford graduate, Nate Fast, if you remember. Of course. Okay.
Yeah, I chaired his oral defense. So
He's amazing.
I know.
The title of his paper will tell you everything you need to know about what you just asked. The title of the paper is When the Boss Feels Inadequate. And the science is power combined with insecurity about either your status, the stability of your power, anything else, is a horrible, ugly combination that leads people to lash out, to become really autocratic, to become really aggressive, to become really harassing. It's a little bit like Cartman in South Park, like, respect my authority, right? That's exactly what it's like. Now, I would say a couple things. One is, if you have an exit plan from somebody like that, I might exit and say, just avoid, like, take the next exit. But a lot of times we don't. Now, we don't. And so if you think about that, the root cause of that behavior is insecurity, which means the solution is to make the person feel secure, which leads to a series of behaviors that people don't want to do, like lean in rather than lean out. Meaning, if you can show yourself as that person's ally, if you can find something genuinely that you respect and value about the person and compliment them, if you can talk them up or make them shine in another audience, they might start to realize that you are not a threat. And then when they think you're not a threat, they'll treat you better, right? We are nice to people who aren't threats. We're competitive with people we think are. But what happens is that because those people are so off-putting, they're autocratic, they're mean, and behavior's reciprocated, we then show the same thing in turn, which only convinces them I was right to be paranoid all along. Everyone's out to get me. And so,
that's so interesting. Yeah, because I'm gonna add what you just said, because it's when I've been advising people in the past and they've had bosses like this, I've always said it's because they're insecure, right? But I never thought to follow it up to like appeal to them. You know what I mean? I was more exit.
So yeah. Jessica actually had a job where she could fire people, by the way. So we're thinking of like an academia where people are so hard to get rid of. Oh, they're going to be easier to get rid of all of a sudden. Is that I'm thinking of a great chair I had, and we had a very difficult administrator at Stanford who was almost like the poster child for the example I remember from Nate Fast's research was, would you get the person to bark like a dog? Oh. I remember that.
Totally.
That, like
demeaning behavior. Yes.
Demeaning behavior to bark like a dog. Anyway, but there's two solutions that I remember. A very wise chair, I said, well, we have two solutions. We can fire her, or we can bolster her. And she said, first I'm going to try to bolster her, which she tried for 2 years, and then she fired her. So, but at Netflix, you didn't need to wait that long, right, Jessica?
We didn't. But I think we did not have to wait that long. In fact, that would have been a very painful 2 years. I wouldn't be able to do it. But I do think it's interesting, this like idea of a threat, and when you become not a threat, like you might be able to build a relationship there or make that person feel more secure, right?
That's right. So if you're on the receiving end of an insecure power holder, right, and you have to go through them and interact with them, I think making them feel secure is going to be the most controllable thing that you have. Or using, talking them up to other people, having those, using your network in that way, for sure. I think the other thing to be aware of, and this comes back to thinking about women, is you don't want to be put in that situation. You don't want to become the low status power holder. Even if you're not insecure necessarily, if other people don't respect you and you have a lot of control, that's been a big area of my research, people will treat you poorly. It explains why everyone gets really snarky going through airport security. Right? Where you're like, why? You start to have these conversations and you're like, I know there's no point in having this conversation. Like, why do I have to take my belt off? I didn't take my belt off at the last airport. And you're like, it doesn't matter. Just take off the belt. Just move through. But this idea of there's an immense amount of power there that says you have to do exactly what we say. And that, from 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 a positional hierarchy standpoint, in terms of occupational ranks, it's not the most respected position in other things. So people might say, like, I have, like, I'm a doctor. Who are you to tell me I have to, like, take off my belt? So that idea is we're treated poorly, and that's a challenge for anybody. It can be a challenge, like, I think, roles like HR, roles like compliance, roles like legal, where you are in a position of saying yes and no to a lot of people. At the same time, you're not the revenue generator, which is often where the greatest status is in most organizations. And so that's often a situation where people feel like they're treated poorly, as certainly, like, as they're coming up, through the ranks. And it's also an issue for people with lower ascribed status, which would include women, which is people who hold a categorization that they don't control, that the world has decided is worth less. And so that whole idea of being a low status power holder, you can see evidence that women more so than men end up in that situation, because as you rise, you will get more power, but you may or may not be granted more status, because that's a judgment in other people's brains. Right? I can give you the resources, I can give you the pile of gold and all the decision authority, and you have the resources, and people have to deal with it whether they like it or not. But status, you can't force someone to give it to another person. It's just my decision about how much I respect and value you. So we have situations where we see problematic things like senior women leaving organizations at rates faster than they're being promoted, and at rates that are greater than junior women leaving, which seems paradoxical, because you're like, isn't this the point where I've made it? But if the status isn't there, the respect isn't there, then people start to feel like I'm treated really badly. I'm in the position, but no one actually is taking my counsel. People are leaving me out of the information flow. People are implying I'm not qualified for my job, and those things aren't fun, and people exit. So it goes both ways. It has something to be cautious of if you have a low status power holder as a boss or someone you have to work with. That's a challenge. And I also think you don't want to be in that situation either, because you also then are the recipient of a lot of friction.
Yeah, no, it's so interesting that you're saying that, because, look, I'm a woman, and I got to a very high powered role at Netflix, public company. And I think I had a very lucky environment that I worked in, where I did have the respect, but there were times where I didn't have as much respect. I remember, like, situational things. Like, for example, I would say something, and we go around the table and like, oh, yeah. And then the guy would say exactly what I said, word for freaking word. And they're like, oh, that's such a good idea. Why don't we do that? I was like,
yeah. Heap eating is a thing.
Yeah, I was like, I
heap eating. I've never.
Oh, you have it? So I put it in there. I thought everyone had heard of this. It was a physicist who tweeted this, and it went super viral. Heap eating. Yeah. It's when the man repeats it.
I hadn't heard of that. Yeah, I hadn't actually heard it called that.
So, Alison, I want to shift, and talk about your book.
Oh, sure.
Here's your book. So I started rereading your book for the second time. Just put in a book plug, as an author who's obsessed with language. You should read this book just because because you can hear your voice. It's like, I hear you talking to me now, and you've been talking to me all morning, and it's really a lovely book. I just recommended it to a book club that my wife is in with powerful women. So, but the question here's the question I want to ask. So my wife, who was managing partner of a big law firm and then was CEO of the Girl Scouts of Northern California, the thing that she always talks about when I talk about this balance between being liked and being competent, the way that she describes it is, us guys, we have a kind of like a balance beam, and women have a tightrope. So, I think you and Maggie Neal would agree, like it's harder to do that balance for women than men. Is that right? Isn't that sort of the core problem that you're sort of wrestling with in this remarkable book that you have written?
It is.
Or am I being unfair?
You're 100% correct. It is harder. However, it's harder because women start out with less status than men. And so what happens is that confirmation bias is a very powerful thing. what we see, and this is a part of the work I've done, is once someone respects you, then there's a halo that comes to you, right?
Okay.
Which is I value you, so you must be all the things, right? You're really smart and kind and warm, and you're also really capable and organized and you're likable and you're badass. And once I think those things about you, then all you have to do is not screw up, which isn't that hard. When you have somebody who starts off with lower status, it's about building status. And you have to convince the other person that you are both of those things, which is just more work. And so but the good news is that confirmation bias works for all of us. So once someone has decided that you are very warm and very capable, you get to ride that, whether you're male or female, it'll work, but you have to invest a little bit in building it. And I think that's what really surprises people is, wait a second, I'm doing the exact same thing that guy next to me is doing, and people are reading it totally differently. Yeah, they are, because in their non-conscious brain, they're reading this as a high status person who's done X, which seems like a perfectly reasonable thing to do. And now you're a lower status person who's done X, and it's terrible. It's just not a status building behavior. So that's the bad.
What's an example of that?
Well, I mean, I think it's just like, I express my ideas in a meeting, right? And I just say, here's what we need to do. And I'm very assertive about it. And for the guy...
And you're the female. Yeah, you're the female.
We'll be both, right? For the guy, okay. You're like, everyone's like, good points, good job. Thanks for taking care of the team. And then the woman gets like, you're a little shrill in there. Well, why is that happening? Okay. Because when the people are listening to the guy, inside their brain, they're like, this is a very caring and capable human being talking to me. And if I'm listening to a very caring and capable human being say, here's what we got to do, people. How do I hear that? I hear that as, this person is not going to let us fail. This person is looking out for us, okay? But if I'm listening to a woman and my brain is saying, I have no idea if this person is either caring or capable, okay? They're suspect on both. And then the person says, this is what we got to do, people. It could come off as, this is a person trying to grab credit. And so the idea is that once the status is built, it's an incredibly valuable resource that's fairly easy for us to sustain. It's actually fairly easy to build, even if you're in a disadvantaged position from your ascribed status. I always say, and this is like, look, there are people who are naturally really good at this, and Bob is definitely one of these people. I always say the best time to build your status is when you're new in a relationship and you don't need anything from somebody. This person has not spent more than 10 seconds even knowing you exist. And you sort of figure out really quickly, how can I show up in this person's conscious awareness and convince them in minutes or seconds that I care about them and I know something about something. I think people who are, and I think Bob is like one of the, as you know, like one of the kindest, most giving people, in addition to being crazy smart. But Bob is always
a pain in the ass sometime. Let's.
But as we all are, yeah, we all are.
But all those things are true. He's amazing.
Like the Bobs, the Maggies, they're always trying to figure out like a way of, how can I help you? But not just like, how can I drive you to the airport? But how can I do something that is unique, I'm uniquely good at, that will make your life better? And whether that's make an introduction to somebody or give them, I have a really, Bob has a big social media network, he has a lot of followers on social. So praising somebody on social is something that's kind of unique to Bob that other people wouldn't be able to do as easily, but that kind of thing. And I think that mentality of, how can I take what I'm naturally good at, use it to be of service really quickly, and then get that person on board pretty quickly so that it's not years of work. And I think what people do that don't think about this is they just say, I'm just going to do what I do. And I am really capable and I am really caring. So what's the issue? And I'll be fine with it until I wake up one day and realize that somebody doesn't see it that way. And now I'm panicked. I'm not getting the rewards. I'm not getting the praise. I'm not getting the advancement, whatever it is. And now I'm super motivated to change. And that's when people will like call Bob and I out of the woodwork 20 years after they graduated. Like, I've got a problem. Can you help me? They'll want to really focus on, now I want to invest in this relationship because it's gone sideways. And I just say, you can, and I can talk to you about it. But it would have been way easier to do a few things 5 years ago than all the work you're going to do after you spent 5 years being underestimated.
Yeah.
So I want to follow up on this, on a specific element. And this is a conversation I had with Maggie 7 or 8 times in my life. And I probably with my wife 100 times, and with many Stanford undergraduates, and especially the ones who go to work for McKinsey, Bain, or Boston Consulting Group right after they graduated, which might have happened to you. And one of the bits of advice I give them, based on what, and Maggie gave me this advice, my wife gave me this advice, a woman named Mary Cranston, who ran the first AmLaw 100 law firm, gave me that advice, my wife's old boss, which is that, if you're not sure whether to be a doormat or a bitch, and I'm quoting Maggie, be a bitch. What do you think of Maggie's comment about that? I think Maggie told me that more than 10 times. And my wife 100 times.
Okay, so if I presume...
Is that unfair?
No, I don't mind it. I think, but here's the thing. If the premise is there's only two choices, then I think I'd pick the same. That's why Maggie and I gel well together. But I think the issue is, and this is, that we assume those are the only two choices, and there's actually science on this. So the science on it is what's called, this is like where psychologists need to have terms that are easier to say, compensatory impression management. So this is a thing, and it's our false, psychology's, we're good at documenting all kinds of false beliefs we hold.
I don't know what that means.
You won't.
Yeah.
I'll explain it, and then you can forget the term.
I don't either.
But the term, the concept is really, this concept will stick. The basic idea is human beings hold a false belief that you can only be liked or competent, you can't be both. How does that show up? When in studies, we give people the task of go into this room of strangers or meet somebody and convince them that you're really smart, what do people instinctively do? They get less nice. And when you give them the same task, go in there and convince people you're really nice, what do they start to do? They start to downplay their competency because they believe it's not possible to be both. And that's just a false narrative that we hold that does hold us back to say, sometimes that's going to be the case. Your only choices are doormat or bitch. You've got to pick. But I always say, is there a path that has both being likable and being capable at the same time? And if so, that's the door to walk through. And it starts with recognizing that a choice doesn't have to be made. And I mean, I've done this for so long in my own life as well, of this idea of compensating. And every time I say this in audiences at people who have had the same experience laugh. So I went to Dartmouth as an undergrad, then I go to McKinsey, then I go to Stanford. Okay. Those are three very elite institutions, super privileged to go to those places. I have spent for a very long period of my life playing like resume dodgeball with people. Like, so they'll say stuff like, where'd you go to college? And I'll go, in New Hampshire. Well, where? And I'll be like, Hanover. Where'd you go to graduate school? On the West Coast. They will have to ask me 93 questions to get me to say something like, I went to Dartmouth. I went to Stanford. Why? Because I'm not trying to say something in a conversation that's going to make me look capable, but at the expense of feeling like, are you bragging? Like, do you have a weird tone in your voice when you said it? I'm like, easier not to discuss it. So that's an example of thinking about, I'm holding back on something with the explicit purpose of just trying to be a nice, normal person in a conversation. And every time I say, there's research on that, which is people will hide high status identities because they don't want to be seen as bragging. But that pulling back isn't actually serving either goal, right? That there are much more effective ways to say, I highly value you, and I'm a person who's really capable and knows what they're doing. And when you start to recognize it doesn't have to be an either or, it starts to open up lots of really simple ideas.
Okay. Yeah. I accept that in theory and most of the time, but I'm just thinking, I'll tell you a story. So my wife is a new associate in a law firm, and a male CEO comes in and immediately assumes that she is the secretary, of course.
Of course.
And asks her to sit in a side seat, not at the table, to negotiate. I don't think she had any choice but to be a bitch and say, nope, I'm a lawyer. I'm going to sit at the table. She pushed back really hard.
Yeah, as she should have.
To me, that's
a great story. Yeah.
And in those moments, I think she had to be a bitch.
Yeah. What do you say, Alison? What do you say?
So do you think if he understood that she was an attorney, he would have said sit at the table?
Oh no. Then she got basically women attorneys are useless. even though she had, the
Wait,
first
he
woman,
said that to her?
Yeah, basically. I mean, there's ways to say that without saying that.
Right. Yeah. God.
Okay. So here's like the example. Like these things happen and they're nobody's fault and they blindside you and you're like, what am I supposed to do? And I don't think there's a right necessary way to handle it. I always say to people, you don't have to handle everything in the moment because you got to think about relationships as long games. And so even if you exit and you're like, as you're leaving, you're like, I really wish I'd handled it differently. If you are really, caring and capable, you have many opportunities to come back. Okay. The second thing I tell people is like, just because someone was like rude, offensive, etc., I am always telling people one of the lines from Kim Scott's brilliant book, Radical Candor, which is a good boss should strive to leave 3 unimportant things said every day. And I'm sorry, 3 unimportant things unsaid every day. Like just because you think it doesn't mean you have to say it. And I think sometimes when people say these really rude things, the question is like, is correcting it at this moment really necessary for me to be able to achieve my longer term goals? Or you can just be rude and eventually you'll figure it out and you'll be kind of embarrassed and it'll be fine. And then I think but the other thing I think of is that when we start to be a little more proactive than reactive, we can start to cut a lot of these things off at the pass by anticipating that they might happen. Meaning, your wife had no way to know that at that moment that she would be assumed to be the secretary. But we generally know we can be underestimated all the time. And so to think about what are the easy proactive things I can do? Like I'll walk into every room and I'll walk up to somebody and introduce myself and I'll say who I am and what I do. And that, if I were proactive before anyone said sit over there, might have changed the person's response, right? And so I start to think about what are authentic things that you can do before you've ever encountered a problem. Like, people talk similarly about being interrupted or spoken over in meetings. And I'll say to them, well, have you ever interacted with this person before? Could you have predicted that this person would interrupt you, speak over you, steal your idea? And a lot of times the answer is, yeah, I could. So then I say just a little bit of strategizing could help you out, which is I'm going into this meeting. I'm going to go say to Bob, the highly respected person in the room, hey, Bob, I got some things I want to share. If I get cut off, like, will you be my wingman and will you make sure I get to finish my thoughts? And Bob would happily be like, sure, gotcha. And then he would start paying attention to me. If he wasn't defending me before, it was because he didn't know I was being defended. And he's thinking about the fact that he's hungry and what's he going to do when he gets home. But with a little bit of help from our allies, we do too many of these things ourselves and don't recognize that other people are happy to help us out if we tell them exactly what we want. And so that's an example where I say to people, you might get interrupted. There's nothing wrong with having a little pact with the other people who are, believe in the same things you do to say, hey, it's easier for you to step in and go back and say, hey, I want to hear what Alison was saying than for me to say, don't interrupt me. And I think that's where that third category is, Bob, of if I have to do it all myself, I'm going to look bitchier than if I have other people who could step up and then they can help build my status without me having to take it all on.
It's so fascinating. So, for the women out there that, they don't want to do the doormat bitch thing, what should they do? Like, I mean, I get this like proactive stuff, but if there's like one takeaway for the women out there who are, making their way up in an organization or just starting their career in general, how do they build status in an authentic way, but quickly?
Yeah. Okay. So I'm going to give you 2 different ideas that relate to each other. First is the second you meet someone, that's when your relationship starts. The second you meet someone, look for a way that you can be like helpful and generous in a way that showcases your capability. I think for me, the easiest way to do that is to make introductions and to be a connector. Why do I love this? Because it's super fast for you. You can meet somebody, you can talk to them in line at Starbucks for 5 minutes, and by the end of it, know enough of their life story to figure out someone you could introduce them to be helpful. You write an email that takes you 2 minutes, less if you now use what my friend just told me about this morning of some AI thing that writes your emails for you. But nevertheless, you send the email, person A, meet person B, you're both spectacular, I'll get out of the way. Okay? Now, the value of that is, if that's a mutually beneficial connection, right? You've been able to show up as helpful. Like, here's my contact for your benefit, and you're knowledgeable in a way that's unique. I know people you don't know. So when you start to look for things like that, you can find really quick ways to be like, I'm going to help you and I'm going to get out. So intros, I think, are a great way to do that. The second thing I would say is that we build our status ourselves by the way we show up, the stories we tell about ourselves, and you can't shirk that work. At the same time, the other way our status gets built is the things that other people say about us, generally when we're not around. And so we have spent our lives since middle school trying to avoid people talking about us behind our back. But a lot of the ways that people talk about us when we're not there is super helpful to us. So like, Jessica, we're meeting for the first time. I have no idea like how this came to be, but I'm guessed through Bob, and I'm guessing Bob didn't say, Allison's really meh. Like, but we're running out of good guests.
No, you said the exact opposite. Right? You said the exact opposite.
So think about that. Who knows what I was doing? Like taking a nap, riding the bike, and there's Bob building my status for me. And so that is a really powerful thing that we can get smarter about leveraging. And so this is this.
Yeah. So how does one do that? I mean, obviously, like if like management and leadership are talking about you when you're not in the room, how do you get them to say the right things about you versus Allison's meh?
Okay. So there's 3 steps. Okay, and then it'll end with the one I was about to tell you. So the first one is you got to meet more people. So rule number 1 is people can't talk you up if they don't know you exist. And being open to just conversations is another like thing I really admire about Bob. Is I think Bob is like genuinely likes humanity and is curious about people, and so probably has a lot of conversations with people. And some of them are just one and done, and some of them open up these pathways of like great lifelong friendships or collaborations or things like that.
Or I'm a terrible gossip would be another way to put that. More. I love gossiping. Anyway,
who doesn't?
This is what makes Bob.
Everybody
really fun.
Wants the tea, Bob. Everybody wants the tea.
So meeting more people, and I talk about the fact that one of the people who was really great promoter for me, I met her in an airport bar because I just struck up a random conversation, which I don't typically do. And so starting to get in the habit of actually bringing more people into your life and thinking the next person who could open a door for me, I have no idea where they could be. That's one. Second thing is, what are the quick and easy things I can do to show up as I have to earn their respect first before they're going to sell me. So if we are trying to get people to talk us up and they don't value us, that's always going to go poorly. So what are the ways I can add value to their life, from something super quick like an introduction to something a little more effortful in terms of figuring out what they care about and adding some value to it. And then the third one is you have to motivate them to pick up the microphone. And what I mean by that is, like, outside this conversation right now, there are people who know each of us who really respect us. But what percentage of those people are currently telling everybody how awesome we are versus just thinking we're amazing and doing something else? We actually, in order for someone to promote you, they have to start saying words, writing words. So I think that happens in 2 ways. The first piece of advice, which is the one I was going to say just a minute ago, is going to be really easy. And I think if people heard this and did only one thing, I would say do this, which is become an evangelical talker-upper of the great work that people around you are doing. Anytime, so like one of my rules is anytime I have myself thinking a thought like, oh, that person is great for whatever reason, I try to not let that thought die in my head. I try to do something with it, like post it on social, tell somebody that is influential for them, make an introduction, whatever it is. And why do I say this? It's one of the most authentic and strategic things you can do, right? Talking up people is a beautiful way to live, but also human behavior is all rooted in reciprocity. When someone opens the door for you, you stop and open the next door for them. When you hear that someone was in a room talking about how great you are, what are you going to do? Look for the next opportunity to return the favor and talk them up. So if we start doing it, not only are we becoming great allies, just through natural reciprocity, we start getting a lot more of it. But then,
I mean, it's just so logical, but it doesn't occur to you. But it's just, it's a no-brainer.
It's so fun, right? And this is where I see people who have like a lot of like goodness around them is they're just really good at building up other people. And there's new research that just came out on this. Like when you build other people's status is not a zero-sum thing. It actually increases your own. It doesn't detract from yours. And we think,
So Adam, our friend
That's
Adam
right.
Grant, I knew him when he was a PhD student. He is now like one of the most famous of the most famous organizational psychologists ever, I think. But he's always been the same, and he still does it. He can't help himself. He's always introducing people. He's always like he gets all this other stuff done. I mean, he just amazes me, and I think that it's not because he has so much status. It's because now it's just he's so consistent in doing that for other people. And he's got to protect himself because he has so many demands on his time. But he's amazing.
He is amazing, but he's also a good example about getting really efficient with the value you contribute. So for example, I always say to somebody, if you found yourself repeating the same advice to people more than twice, it's a good idea to write it down because someone else is probably interested in that. So Adam has, knowing him well too, because it's always a fun fact. Everyone's like, how do you know Adam Grant? I'm like, oh, I hired Adam Grant into his first job. Yeah. And everyone's like, oh my God, you guys are such good friends. And I was like, yeah, you know how to like get like a famous person to be your friend? Meet them when they're not famous.
Be their boss.
Meet them when they're not famous and spend a lot of time like working with them and being good to each other, right? I was like, okay, I knew he was brilliant. I didn't know it would pay off exactly like that. But the point is that he's automated a lot of stuff. And I've learned a lot from interacting with him that he's able to magnify how many people he can help because he has so many things he can point to. So when you have a good organizational system that is combined with a spirit of generosity and a lot of knowledge, you can find ways to be fast. And one of the things I noticed was a lot of ways that people can be efficient with this. And honestly, like Bob and I are both on social pretty often. And that's why I use social it's a fast way to add value to a lot of people's lives without having to have a lot of individual conversations. So Adam is brilliant and he's generous, but he's also really smart about finding the efficiencies in that. And I think that's something that, the mere mortals of us can adopt. But I was just going to say the final thing though, of how do you get people to talk you up? Because I don't think this can be skipped is yes, you should talk them up first. But the other thing is ask for it. And one of the biggest things that, I've learned from all my years of this being in negotiation is it's not just for cars, houses, and salaries. Negotiation is for anything you want. And sometimes what I most want is someone to go to a room I'm not in and talk me up. And so I'll use like Bob as an example because Bob actually knows me before today. Like, I would say if like Bob did, I guarantee you did not wake up at any point today say, let me think about what Alison might need and how I might be able to help her. Okay. Not because he doesn't care about me, but because I'm one of 8 million people he knows and he has his own life to manage. But if I called Bob and I said, hey, Bob, here's something that would be really helpful. Would you please tell so-and-so that you're going to talk to anyway, that fill in the blank, right? That my book exists or I did this work or et cetera. I'm only going to ask Bob to tell things that I know he really believes and are true. The reaction I would get from him, and not just him, but anybody, is sure. Like, that's not hard. Yeah. I already know that person. You want me to convey some facts? Not a big deal. But it would never occur to them. So when we start asking people to be our promoters, our microphones, we're going to get a lot more of it. And I always say that when I ask people to do this, the facial expression that I can decode is not annoyance, right? It's relief. It's like, oh, you're asking me to do something really easy. And thank God, because I do want to help you, but I really was worried about what you were going to ask me for. You could have asked me to drive you to the airport. That would have been horrible.
Yeah. This is so good. I'm not good at that. Are you good at that, Bob?
Yeah, I probably am good at that. I hate to say it, but the
Why
one
do you
thing
hate
I
to
would
say
say
it? You should love to say it.
Well, but I think I try to not ask too much of people, and that's the one footnote. That's the sort of give and take. The Adams book is that there is a certain type of person who just ask. All they ever do is ask for favors, and they never do anything for you. And so that's the one proviso is that if you talk about reciprocity, when you're in a relationship with someone where there's no reciprocity, that doesn't work.
Yes.
For me.
Yeah.
And Bob, and this is going to be your category. I always say this to people. This is definitely true for women. It's equally uncomfortable the other way. When you're in a relationship with someone who constantly does for you and never asks anything or will accept anything, you start to get uncomfortable in that relationship. So when I say, like, example is, if you ever had friends you go out to dinner with and they insist on paying every single time. And you're like, I'm not really keeping score, but at some point, I'm actually less interested in going out to dinner with you because I know what's going to happen is I'm never going to be able to reciprocate or contribute. That can be
feel like they're holding it over your head.
And even if they don't,
in some weird way,
it makes you feel bad. They aren't, I don't think, doing anything that's rude. It's like the imbalance of this is crushing me. And so I do think that the science is we overestimate how put out other people will be by our requests for help. It keeps us from asking. People are, when you start to flip it around, right? Dan Pink always has this thing, stop thinking you're so unique, right? False uniqueness is a problem. So I always flip it around. And I think if it came to me, how bothered would I be? How hard is it? And you start to realize those things aren't that hard. And that people like to be helpful and they like to be helpful in easy ways. And I think that I have spent, and I'll say this, Bob, I now spend a lot of time talking with women. Rarely do I find a woman whose issue is they only show up when they need things and they don't give. Much more often, it's the other. I've given. I never collect. Even when I think someone could help me, I don't want to ask.
That's why I'm not very good at asking. I have, and when I do, I'm very uncomfortable about it. But I give all the time. I'm a huge connector, but I'm going to work on this because there's science behind this, and I believe in the science, and I believe you, Alison, and I'm going to be better. But we have to start wrapping up, unfortunately, because I know
I can talk to Alison. You're so awesome.
I know. I could talk to you all day. Alison, before we jump into career confessions, we always ask for a little nugget. Like, what do you want to leave the listeners with if you can leave them with, like, one thing?
So here's what I would say. Authenticity and strategy are not opposites. You can absolutely be both. And I think for so many people, particularly women, they felt like they cannot be their true selves. And I always say this, if you don't care about anybody and you're not good at anything, I can't help you. But I'm going to presume that most of the people listening care and they have skills, which means the only issue is how do I communicate that? And that leaves a ton of space to be who you really are and just think with intention about how you show up to get maximum credit for all that you've already contributed.
Love it. Okay, so I'm going to read the confession real quick. Okay, so I'll set up the question. They gave us a little context. So I just started a new job 2 weeks ago, and I already feel like I'm behind. Everyone around me seems to know exactly what they're doing, and I'm stuck second guessing myself, even on small tasks. I keep over preparing because I'm scared of being seen as incompetent, but it's really slowing me down and stressing me out. Question: how do I strike the right balance between wanting to prove myself and not burning out or overcompensating and losing my mind in the process? Ooh, what say you, Bob and Alison?
I'm going to defer to Alison for starters. This is hard.
Okay. So first is, I think to recognize some people will talk about it as like an impostery voice or a lack of confidence it's just inevitable in this. And so that voice is often a signal to us that we're doing something wrong. But I would say no. Anytime we're learning and growing, right? Right now I'm here. I aspire to be here. Like I really want to excel in this role. There's a gap. And that feeling of lack of confidence, imposter syndrome, it sits in that gap. But there's no way to grow, achieve, to do anything without having that feeling. So I think the first is the feeling is bad enough, but the judgment about the feeling is really paralyzing. Like I shouldn't be feeling this way. And therefore, because I am, I'm doing something wrong. To say, the feeling that way is like having sore muscles after a workout, which is, it doesn't feel particularly fun to be sore, but it's not a sign you did anything wrong. That's natural. So the second thing I would say is, when you're new is the time when you are allowed to not know anything. What I think a lot of people do is they are not authentic. They try to hide it. And then 5 years in, you don't know something. And then you think, now I really can't ask. That you have this status as a newcomer that allows you to be curious and to learn and to always think about. So this is an example that someone came to me related, where a woman went into an internship in business school, confessed that she wasn't good at A, B, and C, and then got hired still, but then felt like she was sort of classified as not being good at A, B, and C. And I said, you can be authentic and strategic. You can admit you don't know without saying, oh my God, I'm the stupidest person alive. Can you help me?
Right.
To say, hey, in the world that I came from, this is my instinct, is to do it this way. It really matters to me that what I do is on point with the culture. This is my first idea. Do you mind if I get some reactions to you to see if you think that would fit well in this environment? Both of those are, I don't know, can you help me? But they land really differently. So thinking about how can I create a message of, I know what I'm doing and I really care about getting this right here. And when you show up with that curiosity, it allows you to do the same thing, just shifted message, and it's not, I'm unqualified for this job, you should be rethinking your choices, versus I have a lot of skills, I need to learn from you about the culture.
It's so right on.
As a subtext, and it's interesting that you had Maggie Neal as a advisor, that a lesson from that also is the context you choose is very powerful. The mentor and the norms in the group. So that's sort of like a growth mindset that works great with somebody like Maggie. There's other people in the world who simply will dismiss somebody who isn't competent or confesses that they need help. And so I think, Jessica, we know this, that choosing the people that you work with, the person that you marry or whatever, it's very important.
It is very important. It really is. And I mean, I really don't have much to add to your advice, Alison, because I think you're right on. And I think, the biggest takeaway, for that person is that they are new, right? Like they can ask questions, and your brain is evil sometimes. It tells you all these lies that aren't true. It's like, it's your worst enemy sometimes. And so I think leaning into the fact that you're there for a reason and that you're new and that you're capable. And then I think reading your book, Likeable Badass, is another great next step for this person.
Can't hurt.
Yes, read the book. Okay, Alison, it's been so fun. Where can people find you if they want to know more about you?
Okay, so I have the easiest one-stop shop is go to my website, AlisonFragale.com, has all the things, has stuff about my book, has all the podcasts and fun things I've done. But then there's 3 things. I put out a newsletter on Substack, free newsletter, called The Upper Hand. And then I actually don't know if Bob's on Instagram. I haven't figured that out yet because
No, Bob's not.
No, he's not.
Bob is a big deal on LinkedIn. Okay, so I'm on LinkedIn. Find me near Bob, and I'm on Instagram. I'm trying to learn and figure out that platform. Those are the 3 ways people can find me.
Okay. And then they can get the book anywhere that they get books.
Anywhere
right?
you get books.
Okay. Thank you, Alison. Thank you, Bob, for being the co-host today. And thank you. You guys have a great rest of the week.
Thank you. And thanks, Alison, for writing such a fabulous book. Most management books aren't very good. This is one that really is worth reading. I really want to emphasize that.
Coming from you, Bob, makes my day.
Yay. Get your book, people.